My name is Francesca. I work at the Way, and I'm the delivery manager. So a delivery manager, to my European friends, is effectively a role that is a hybrid between a Scrum Master and a Program Manager. It was born in the UK public sector and then slowly extended into the private sector, which is where I work. I currently lead a team of program and delivery managers in the CIO org at a typical way. So we deal mostly with data, infrastructure, security, and teams. And I lead a team of about 20 people that operate in a space that has about 8 teams. This is going to be important for what I'm going to say later. With regards to my background, I've had quite a mixed background. I started a little bit in product engineering, and then I moved forward to in Scrum Mastery, product management, and a little bit of program. So the first time I presented this talk was actually internally at the Ski Takeaway, and there was a little bit of a joke going on because the way the talk was presented was scaled agile. And actually, that's pretty funny because this is not at all what this was about. Actually, this is the story of how I failed to implement scaled agile. So back 3 years ago when I became a manager, I had this big dream because obviously the area I was operating in had a lot of work streams and body streams. So I thought it would be really cool to implement something like flag levels or nexus and so on. However, I had a very big reality check when I tried to do that. We had a series of problems that were actually preventing me from achieving that. First and foremost, there were very few of us. So, as I said in the beginning, right now we have about 20 people in 80 gigs. So, if you think about the way typically agile roles work, you can imagine that that's quite scattered and not quite, the amount that you need to have. Secondly, at the time, we didn't have any program managers. Now we do, but that's still very few. So we didn't have people who were able to manage big, complex work streams. That makes sense. We didn't have a lot of product presence either, so we were lacking the vision side of things. We basically just had the engineering teams trying to do their best, which is good, but very hard for my view. And also, we have varying levels of agile maturity across the board. And that was because there were so few of us. So the way it was working is that some teams had organov. So maybe they had the in-teams Scrum Master type figure that had implemented a great work practices with the teams. And then there were teams that were basically abandoned for themselves. And this was, it was very difficult for them to actually achieve a level of agile maturity. So it became very clear really quickly that what we needed was not quite scaled agile, but an infrastructure on which we could build scaled agile, but also other things. Effectively, we had to find an effective way to operate, given how few of us there were. So the solution we found together was actually a 3-part solution. First and foremost, we had to identify what we call a minimum level of service coverage. So effectively, a bare minimum of delivery service that could be guaranteed to all teams are confined to avoid that, gap between teams in terms of agile maturity. Secondly, we had to find an easy and intuitive way to actually zoom into problems that we could then solve in an efficient way. And then we also had to provide teams with tools that they could use to develop themselves, so without necessarily having a bottleneck on the delivery manager or the Scrum Master. So to dive a little bit into the first topic, which is the minimum service coverage. This is how I personally interpret the role of a delivery manager. It's these 7 areas. I know it's a bit controversial and I know that it's up for debate depending on the company, but this is pretty much the way we used to intend the role of the delivery manager at Just Eat Takeaway. So first and foremost, we helped teams identify metrics that mattered to them. And when I say metrics, I mean in the most generic meaning that is possible. So it could be your product metrics, it could be your engineering DevOps metrics, or your flow metrics, sprint metrics, whatever there is to measure that matters to the team. We wouldn't mandate what types of metrics the team needed, but we would help them find their own. We would also run programs because, again, it's a hybrid role. So effectively, our role was to accompany the teams through delivery of outcomes, and that meant also manage big work streams. Health checks, also really important, because I personally believe that a healthy team is also a more productive team that can do great things. Ways of working, same as we were saying with metrics, we would help the teams find what worked for them. Agile practices, that doesn't need any introduction. We would help teams achieve the type of agility that works for them. We would also help teams plan their work. I say continuous planning because it's the type of planning I prefer. I don't really believe into big block quarterly planning. I know that that's the reality in some cases. I just don't prefer it, to be honest. And then backlog management support. So we would help teams visualize their work with whatever tools are in use at that time. We use Jira and Confluence. I'm aware that elsewhere other teams may use something different. So, given how few of us there were, you can easily imagine that this is a lot. It could easily lead to burnout, but also it could lead to inefficiency. So what we had to do at that point was select among this big remit that I described some areas that we would guarantee to everyone at all times. So this is it. This was the result of selection. So we decided to maintain of the current remit the attention to metrics, health checks, planning, and backlog management support. Now, this ruffled a lot of feathers, especially among the stakeholders, but also the individual engineering teams. Because if you think about it, the selection that I've just highlighted feels a little bit cold, with the exception of health checks. It's very, facts and data. In reality, though, this was never meant to be all that a delivery manager would do. It would be just a baseline level of service. And effectively, the areas we selected were selected because they would give us enough information to be able to then make important decisions. So the way this works and the way we transition from a minimum level of service coverage into, a deep dive and problem solving is that the delivery manager just looks at their data sets. Obviously, among the data sets, I also include this relationship with the team. So obviously, we don't just talk data and numbers. There needs to be an underlying level of relationship with the team that needs to be maintained. Doesn't mean attending all the stand-ups and so on, but there needs to be a human connection that would allow us to communicate. Other areas that a delivery manager would look at would be well-being metrics and health checks. We would try and see what's going on with the teams from a human perspective. Activity and communication metrics. Do the team communicate well? Do they do pair programming? Do they work together? Do they review each other's work? Do they team up and mentor each other? Are they efficient? Are they productive? Is their code secure? And also, are they visualizing their work in some way? It doesn't necessarily have to be, again, Jira. I prefer it, but it doesn't have to be that. But is the work visible? Are the teams aware of the work that's going on from a holistic perspective? So the delivery manager would look at these data sets and then would spot problems or opportunities. So the way this would work is that when a problem arises, it doesn't get taken as absolute truth. The delivery manager would compare the findings coming from data with other data. And then if the problem is confirmed, then they would initiate a conversation with the team to see if the problem is recognized by the team, first of all, and then if the team accepts to be coached. This is really, really important. We never coach teams without their consent. We need to try and find solutions together and act as a well-gelled group. At that point, the delivery manager would then coach the team through resolution of their issues and then end this type of engagement and go look for a different problem. So in this way, the delivery manager would be able to operate in a large area, potentially, let's say, 7, 8, 9 teams in an effective way without burning out and without having to necessarily be in all the stand-ups, sprint planning, retrospectives, and so on. I'm going to make an example to explain a little bit what that means. And this is a real-life example that has actually happened. So a delivery manager ran a cycle of health checks in a group of teams. So for context, a just takeaway, our health checks are effectively revolving around scoring 6 main areas. We don't use the Spotify health check model. We use a model that is inspired by the Google 5 characteristics of high-performing teams, if anyone is familiar with it. So it's inspired to, it's not exactly that. So the 6 areas that get looked at are psychological safety, which I think doesn't need introduction. Dependability, which means effectively it explains whether or not team members can rely on each other to deliver good quality work. Structure and clarity, which effectively is revolving around the idea that the team has the appropriate tool or information that they need to do their job. Meaning of work is an area that focuses on whether or not the engineering teams feel like they're delivering good work and meaningful work. Impact of work is more outward facing. So effectively, it's whether or not stakeholders feel like the team that the work that the team delivers is important. And then speed, which is effectively whether or not the engineers feel like they are proceeding at a pace that is satisfactory. So in this example, the delivery manager spotted that the scoring for speed kept going down. Obviously, it's a health check, so it has a lot to do with perception. And this is even more of a reason why we shouldn't just stop at the first metric. Then, the data from the health check was compared to other data sets that were available, such as the cycle time, the rate of work in progress, whether or not there were blockers, and so on. And effectively, the delivery manager, together with the team, acknowledged that there was indeed a problem going on in the team, that the team was going slower than they liked. So at that point, the deep dive started, and the delivery manager started observing the team a little bit more closely, started acting a little bit like an in-team scrum master. So attending all of their events, looking at what the team was doing, etc. The analysis returned some results, and effectively what it emerged was that the team had a series of blockers that were always occurring with the same teams. So the team was always blocked on the same external teams. At that point, the team started, with the help of the delivery manager, started mapping their dependencies a little bit better, but also found out that the reason why they were also going slower is that because they were getting stuck on other teams, they were dragging more work in progress and therefore creating bottlenecks for themselves. So the way it went, and of course I'm oversimplifying because this was a process that went for quite a long time, effectively the team was coached in principles such as the little slow, but also started planning their dependencies with a little bit of notice and initiated a conversation around organizational design as well. Because if you're always blocked on the same teams, then there's something fundamentally wrong with how things are being structured. So at that point, the delivery manager supported the team through this resolution, and then we started the cycle somewhere else. Self-service tools also need a mention, because it's true that there was and there is still very few of us in the organization, but I also don't think, and this makes me a little bit unpopular among my peers, I don't think that there's a need to have a Scrum Master in each and every team necessarily, because at the end of the day, even if we think about how Scrum started, it was engineers self-organizing at the end of the day. So we should promote that type of behavior, and we should provide engineering teams with the tools that they need to find the right pace for themselves. So we started working also a little bit on our self-service tools that would be effectively anything that would help engineers achieve that. I'm going to have a non-conclusive list here. I think it really depends on the realities of the companies that you operate in. But effectively, these tools include metrics dashboards. My team at Just Eat Takeaway has created some wonderful easy BI dashboards where we could see all the metrics that mattered everywhere. Obviously, this is not micromanagement. We would just offer these to the teams. And actually, it was engineering teams that asked us to provide that. Now we're using an external tool for that, but easy BI or anything internal that you may have does the job just fine. How-to documentation. Don't underestimate the power of a Confluence page. It seems like a really simple thing to do, but if you create pages around, okay, what's little slow, what's cycle time, etc., people will read it and they will self-serve. Team assessments. I don't actually have that. And I keep putting this on my slide at conferences because I'm always hoping that someone gives me a solution. So my dream is to actually find a nice automated way for a team to do a self-assessment on their Agile practices and find what works for them. So, dear AI friends, if you have any ideas, here's a business idea for you. And if you achieve that, let me know because I'm interested. Project management handbooks. We have my team here, Phoebe, who is here with us, has provided a lot of documentation around how to run a program if you're not actually a program manager, so that engineers can just run their projects and just achieve results without us. And then training. It's really important to train engineering leaders into agility and into program management so that they can either self-serve or understand the purpose of these practices. We run a 3-day training course internally at Just Eat Takeaway that trains engineering managers to be their own delivery managers. Now, this is my favorite section because actually, when I explain it on stage, it sounds really smooth and easy, but this was actually a really bumpy road. And there were a lot of learnings. So first of all, when you try to scare yourself, the first temptation is not to scare yourself and burn out. So what I've observed in myself and other delivery managers was that we were trying to do it all. So instead of selecting and prioritizing, we were trying to be a Scrum Master in 7, 8, 9 teams. If you think about your standard, let's say Scrum events, not everyone does Scrum, but you can imagine it's impossible to actually do that. And it leads to burnout and lack of well-being. We need to practice what we preach, and we need to learn how to prioritize the biggest value items. And this is the recipe of success. In the context of that, dream big and think in ecosystems. When you're prioritizing, my recommendation, even though it's not always that way, is to focus on problems that impact the largest amount of teams. You probably have met in your career a Scrum team or a Kanban team that has implemented their work practices just fine and yet still failed to deliver their outcomes. And the reason why that is that despite that team was working really, really well, the ecosystem they were in was not quite working right. And so they were not delivering. So if you need to select problems to solve, try and think about large scale first. This is a bit coherent with the theory of flight levels, if you're familiar with it. Now, also, this system was created in a moment of crisis. I basically came up with it because I was desperate. I was trying to make things work. But it's not a system that is necessarily just applicable for teams that are understaffed, effectively. It works just fine, even if you have more people available, and actually works even better. So the difference is here. Let's imagine we have 6 teams and we need a delivery person. We just have one. The delivery manager proceeds the way I described it. So conducts their analysis, does that deep dive, and then repeat. If let's say you had 2 delivery managers, even cooler, because effectively they can conduct their analysis together, they can look at data together, and then they can conduct multiple deep dives simultaneously. They can be connected, they don't have to be connected, and then look at their achievements together and then repeat. This is actually quite a good way to go on about this, because it also helps training more junior team members. So looking at data, looking at metrics together, it's a bit like pair programming for engineers, really. So there's a lot of learning to be had. Another thing that I've encountered in my career in general, and not just for this system, is that teams sometimes don't know what they need from their scrum masters or delivery managers. So they come up with requests that are rather bizarre, such as, can you run all of our stand-ups as a host? Or can you schedule all of our meetings? Can you write our user stories? Or can you tidy up our backlog? Now, none of these things are actually in the remit of a delivery manager. We know that reality is complex, and I myself have organized a meeting before for a team, right? And the way I see it is that these things are a bit like making tea for your team. It makes sense sometimes for you to do it, but if that becomes your entire job, then there's something going on in the team, and it needs to be addressed. We need to make sure that as professionals, we communicate where we can add value and where we can prioritize our needs better. Another problem that we had was that it was really hard to manage expectations. So at the beginning, I talked about how our teams had varying levels of agile maturity. What that meant is that obviously some teams had an in-team scrum master type figure, and effectively they had really great work practices, everything was going fine. Some of the teams were getting absolutely nothing. So when we came up with the system, what happened is that the teams that were receiving nothing were actually happy because they started receiving something. But what that meant is that teams that were treated really, really well started getting annoyed because they started getting less from us, or so they perceived. So effectively, it's really important when implementing something like this to manage expectations and talk to the teams. As I said, it's always a two-way street, and we always coach people while being mindful of their needs or what they believe are their needs. To make an example, one of the many problems that I had when we started implementing this was that a stakeholder got really, really angry because they felt like the delivery manager had to run each and every retrospective in the team forever. So obviously, this is not something that was achievable given how we were operating. And so effectively, I just asked why. What problem are you trying to solve with your retrospectives? Because retrospectives are a workshop, rather potentially one of the simplest workshops you could ever run. So is there something else in there? Why do we need to have a professional facilitator all the time? And what came out of it was actually, after a little bit of digging, is that the team was really unhappy because they didn't know how to plan their work. To which I responded, okay, maybe then we should support you with organizing your planning a little bit better to have a more long-term solution rather than the patch of the retrospective every 2 weeks. When we prioritize, also, we try and take the team on board with us. Obviously, we don't always agree on what the biggest value item is, but it's important to communicate a lot with stakeholders and involve them in our prioritization decisions, and also let them challenge us. It's really important to follow healthy principles of change management when doing this, or everything, to be honest. We need to know how to talk with the teams or the organizations we're dealing with. Some organizations are really flat and really democratic. Some others are really hierarchical. And we should always keep an open mind and consider the as is when we start communicating something. We need to try and find a way to make the message land in the most effective way possible. And also talk about what we do. I think I am borderline annoying to my stakeholders because I keep saying this is what we do, this is the value we add, to avoid situations such as, can you please be my PA and organize my meetings, or can you write my user stories? So in a nutshell, with this and other things, the key is to continue communicating and take the teams on board with us. Thank you very much for listening to me.